The year is 2026, and the engine of Europe just stalled. On January 1st, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz stood at a podium and said something no German leader has dared to say since reunification. He said certain sectors of the economy are in, and I am quoting here, critical condition. But let's get one thing straight before the newspapers print the obituary. This wasn't a sudden heart attack. This was a slow bleed. A 6-year hemorrhage that drained the most powerful industrial economy in Europe while the patient kept insisting it was fine. The Federation of German Industries didn't mince words. They called it the deepest crisis in the history of the Federal Republic. Let that sink in. Not the deepest crisis since the Euro crisis. Not since the financial crash, not since reunification nearly bankrupted the West. The deepest crisis in the entire post-war history of the Federal Republic. This is a country that was literally rubble 80 years ago. A country that clawed its way back from total annihilation to become the powerhouse of an entire continent. And now the man running it is standing at a microphone admitting it is broken. The numbers confirm it. Germany's economy contracted in 2023, contracted again in 2024. And in 2025, it managed a growth rate so pathetic it rounds to 0.3 consecutive years of either shrinking or flatlining. That hasn't happened since records began. The Handelsblatt Research Institute projected a third year of recession. The Weil European Distress Index, a survey of 3,750 listed companies, declared Germany the most distressed market in all of Europe. Imagine you are the third largest economy on planet Earth. You manufacture the best cars, the best machines, the best chemicals humanity has ever engineered. Your exports are worth $1.66 trillion a year. You have a workforce so skilled the world literally invented a word for it, Mittelstand, the backbone of German engineering. And then you flatline, you don't crash, you don't explode, you just stop growing for 6 straight years. Your GDP in late 2025 is still below where it was at the end of 2019. The United States grew 12% in that same window. The rest of the Eurozone grew 4%. Germany, 0 flat. Dead on arrival. How does the country that rebuilt itself from total destruction twice in 1 century suddenly forget how to grow? How does a nation with a $255 billion trade surplus become the most distressed market in Europe? Today we aren't reading the headlines. We are reading the autopsy report. This is the forensic audit of the slow-motion collapse of the German economic miracle. This is the industrial autopsy, the machine that broke itself, or how to build the best engine in the world and then forget to put in fuel. To understand why Germany's economy is flatlining, you have to understand what made it a miracle in the first place. And it starts with a simple formula that worked brilliantly for 50 years. Buy cheap Russian gas, turn it into expensive German products, sell those products to China and America, repeat. That was the German model. It wasn't complicated, it wasn't glamorous, but it was devastatingly effective. Germany became the world's third largest exporter. Goods and services exports hit 44% of GDP. Nearly half of everything the country produced was sold to someone else. The automotive industry alone accounted for 5% of GDP and over 800,000 jobs. The chemical industry was the largest in Europe. The machine tool sector was the envy of the planet. But here's the dirty secret that nobody wanted to talk about while the money was flowing. This model had 3 critical dependencies, 3 single points of failure: cheap Russian energy, the Chinese consumer market, and the assumption that the world would keep buying German engineering forever. It is like building a 3-legged stool and then sawing through all 3 legs at the same time, which is essentially what happened between 2022 and 2025. Here is nail number 1. The gas betrayal. In 2021, before Russia invaded Ukraine, Germany imported 55% of its natural gas from Russia. Let me say that again. 55%. More than half of the gas that powered German factories, heated German homes, and fed German chemical plants came from one country. A country run by an authoritarian leader, with a documented history of using energy as a weapon. And it wasn't just gas. Russia supplied 35% of Germany's oil and over half its coal. Germany had essentially outsourced its entire energy security to Moscow. The European Commission had warned Berlin for years to diversify. They ignored it. Why? Because the gas was dirt cheap. And cheap gas meant cheap electricity, meant cheap manufacturing, meant fat profits. The incentive structure was crystal clear. Keep buying from Putin, keep the factories humming. Then in February 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine, and the bill came due. Russia didn't just cut gas flows, it weaponized them. By summer 2022, the Nord Stream 1 pipeline was operating at 20% capacity. Then came the explosions that destroyed both Nord Stream pipelines entirely. Germany went from receiving 55% of its gas from Russia to receiving essentially zero. Overnight, the cheapest industrial energy supply in Europe became the most expensive. The government panicked, and to their credit, they moved fast. Germany leased 4 floating LNG terminals to import liquefied natural gas from the United States and Qatar. It passed emergency laws to restart coal plants that were scheduled for retirement. It bailed out Uniper, its largest gas importer, with 15 billion euros of taxpayer money. It imposed gas levies on consumers that cost an average family of 4, an extra 480 euros a year. The government literally told citizens and businesses to use less gas. Turn down the thermostats. Take shorter showers. The economic powerhouse of Europe was asking its people to shower less. European gas prices exploded. At their peak in 2022, wholesale gas prices in Europe hit $110 per megawatt-hour. In the United States, $17. That is a 6-to-1 cost disadvantage. Overnight, for every single factory in Germany, the CEO of BASF, the largest chemical company in the world, was asked about an energy embargo on Russia. His response: "Do we knowingly want to destroy our entire economy?" And he wasn't being dramatic. For energy-intensive industries like chemicals, steel, aluminum, and glass, energy isn't just a cost. It is the raw material. You can't make ammonia without gas. You can't smelt aluminum without massive electricity. When energy prices tripled, these industries didn't just get more expensive. Some of them became mathematically impossible to operate in Germany. BASF shut 11 plants at its Ludwigshafen mega site in 2023, 2,500 jobs gone. An ammonia plant closed outright. The Senkrupp shuttered a steel facility. Spera closed its Rheinwerk aluminum plant. Norstar suspended zinc production. U.S. chemical company Trinseo closed a styrene facility in Bad and a polycarbonate line in Stade. Coatings firm Alex pulled the plug on its Hamburg operations. The aluminum smelters, the chemical reactors, the glass furnaces. One by one, the lights went out across German heavy industry. European chemical production dropped 12% between 2019 and 2023. Bloomberg estimated over 10,000 chemical plants across Europe are at risk of closure. And Germany, home to the largest chemical industry on the continent, took the heaviest blow. This wasn't a recession. This was an amputation. And the phantom limb pain will last for decades. But if you think the gas crisis was the only energy disaster, wait until you hear what Germany did to itself. Because the gas was an external shock. The next nail was entirely self-inflicted. Nail number 2. The nuclear suicide. On October 25, 2025, Germany detonated the last 2 cooling towers of its final operational nuclear power plant. 56,000 tons of concrete crumbled in a controlled blast. The crowd watched. Some cheered. And the irony was so thick you could have cut it with a Geiger counter. Here are the numbers. Germany currently pays roughly 3 times the international average for industrial electricity. 3 times German electricity prices are 3 to 4 times higher than in the United States. And what did Germany do in the middle of an energy crisis that was already crippling its industry? It shut down its last 3 nuclear reactors. In April 2023, while factories were closing because energy was too expensive, this wasn't a snap decision. The nuclear phase-out, the Autopsy, began after the Fukushima disaster in Japan in 2011. Angela Merkel reversed her own policy and committed Germany to shutting down all 17 nuclear reactors. The idea was that renewables, primarily wind and solar, would fill the gap, the Energiewende, the great energy transition. But here's the explain it like I am 5 version. You can't run a steel mill on sunshine, not yet. Wind and solar are intermittent. When the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, you need something else. That something else was supposed to be natural gas as a bridge fuel. but the bridge just got blown up, literally. So Germany replaced its zero-emission 24/7 nuclear power with a patchwork of renewables that don't always work in emergency coal plants that were supposed to be retired. Studies have linked the nuclear closures to an estimated $12 billion in annual costs to society, including 170 premature deaths per year from increased air pollution caused by burning more fossil fuels. Germany eliminated its cleanest and most reliable power source in the middle of its worst energy crisis in decades. Imagine your house is flooding and you rip out the sump pump because you don't like the noise it makes. That is the German nuclear policy, and the cost isn't just in kilowatt hours, it is in competitiveness. When your factories pay 3 times more for power than their American competitors, the math is simple. You either raise prices and lose customers, or you move the factory, and that is exactly what has been happening. Which brings us to nail number 3, the Great Exodus, the deindustrialization of Germany. In the first half of 2025, 940 manufacturing firms filed for bankruptcy in Germany. That is part of a staggering 11,900 total insolvencies nationwide, a 9.4% spike from the previous year. In 2024, 196,100 companies vanished entirely, the highest number since the financial crisis. But the insolvencies are just the visible casualties. The invisible ones are worse. Those are the companies that didn't die in Germany. They just left. BASF didn't just close plants in Ludwigshafen. It invested 10 billion euros in a brand new mega factory in China. Volkswagen has been shifting production to Mexico, to the United States, to China. Chemical companies are relocating to the American Southeast, where natural gas is cheap and regulations are lighter. Steel producers are moving to Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic. Think of it this way. Imagine you run a restaurant. Your ingredient costs just tripled. Your rent doubled. Your best cooks are retiring and you can't find replacements. And the city just passed 15 new health codes that require you to file paperwork for every dish you serve. You don't close the restaurant. You open a new one across town where the costs are lower and the rules are simpler. That is what German industry is doing. Except across town is Texas, or Guangdong, or Wrocław. The industrial sector shed nearly 250,000 jobs since 2019, a 4.3% contraction in the workforce. Manufacturing lost 120,000 positions in 2024 alone, bringing the total to around 6.67 million workers. The BDI, Germany's most powerful industry lobby, expects factory output to fall 2% in 2025. That would be the 4th consecutive year of industrial contraction, 4 straight years of the factory floor shrinking, in the nation that defined itself by what it built. And the manufacturing PMI, the Purchasing Managers Index that tracks factory health, fell to 42.1. That is the 26th consecutive month of contraction. Over 2 years of the manufacturing sector actively shrinking. Hamburg Commercial Bank's chief economist said it clearly. The recession in Germany's manufacturing sector deepened with no recovery in sight. The unemployment rate has climbed to 6.2%. Nearly 3 million people are registered unemployed, almost 200,000 more than the year before. And underemployment, which includes people in reduced hours programs and training schemes, sits at 3.6 million. But if you think losing factories to energy costs is bad, wait until you see what happened to Germany's crown jewel, because the automotive industry isn't just declining. It is facing an existential crisis from the East. Nail number 4, the China reversal. For decades, Germany and China had the perfect economic marriage. Germany sold China the machines to build things. China sold Germany cheap consumer goods. And both countries got rich. German automakers, Volkswagen, BMW, Mercedes, Audi, Porsche made up to 40% of their revenue from the Chinese market. China wasn't just a customer, it was the customer. Then China learned to build its own cars, and not just any cars. Better ones, at least in the categories that matter to Chinese consumers. BYD, Xiaomi, Li Auto, NIO, these aren't knockoffs anymore. They're the real deal. The smart cockpit, the seamless digital ecosystem. The battery range that makes German EVs look like prototypes. Chinese consumers started calling German cars mechanical dinosaurs. Excellent hardware, sure, but dumb software compared to a Xiaomi SU7 that integrates with your phone, your home, and your life. And it is not just the product, it is the price. BYD is producing competitive electric vehicles at around 32,000 euros. German equivalents start at 50,000 and go up from there. Even with EU countervailing tariffs reaching up to 37.6% on Chinese EVs, Chinese brands are relentless. BYD recorded 252% sales growth in Europe. Tesla registrations in Germany fell 55% in July 2025 as cheaper Chinese alternatives flooded the market. Let me hit you with the numbers because they are devastating. Chinese brands now control 68.8% of their own domestic car market. German market share in China has plummeted to just 13.1% in the first half of 2025. In the electric vehicle segment, which is the future of the entire industry, German brands combined, that is Volkswagen, Audi, BMW, and Mercedes together, hold approximately 5% market share in China, 5% combined. The consequences back home are catastrophic. In the first half of 2025, the German auto sector shed over 51,500 jobs. Volkswagen announced it would cut 35,000 positions by the end of the decade. For the first time in its 87-year history, VW threatened to close domestic plants. Production capacity is being slashed by 700,000 units. Audi is cutting 7,500 jobs. Porsche slashed 1,900. 100,000 workers went on warning strikes in December 2024. The job security agreement that had protected VW workers since 1994 was canceled. VW's operating profits dropped 37% in the first quarter of 2025 alone. Automotive cash flow went from positive 2.5 billion euros to negative 100 million in a single year. And it is not just VW, the supplier industry is being decimated. ZF Friedrichshafen, one of the world's largest auto parts makers, is cutting 7,600 jobs specifically in its electric powertrain division. A shocking admission that EV parts orders are far below expectations. Bosch, another iconic supplier, has been shedding jobs for months. 10,000 employees demonstrated against layoffs in front of Bosch headquarters in March 2024. An e-consultancy study confirmed that more than 50,000 jobs in the German automotive industry were destroyed within a single year. The Ford Saarlouis plant, which once employed 4,500 people, ceased vehicle production entirely in November 2025. An era over. But wait. If China was stealing the electric future and energy costs were killing the factories, surely the German government was spending massively to fix the infrastructure and retool the economy, right? Oh, my sweet summer child. Nail number 5. The debt break straitjacket. In 2009, in the aftermath of the global financial crisis, Germany did something extraordinary. It wrote fiscal austerity into its constitution, the Schuldenbremse. The debt break. It limited the federal structural deficit to 0.35% of GDP. The states were prohibited from borrowing at all. It was a political statement as much as an economic policy, a declaration that Germany would never ever become like Greece. And for a while, it worked beautifully on paper. Germany's debt to GDP ratio fell from 80% in 2011 to around 62% by 2024. While the United States was running up to 130%, Germany was the fiscal Boy Scout of the Western world. Balanced budgets, fiscal surpluses. 6 consecutive years of surplus before the pandemic. But there is a catch, and the catch is devastating. While Germany was balancing its budget, it was starving its own body. Net public investment has been close to zero for 2 decades. 2 decades of not maintaining, not upgrading, not building. The Bertelsmann Foundation calculated that Germany needs over 100 billion euros annually just to compensate for years of underfunding. 10,000 bridges across the country require modernization. Deutsche Bahn has identified 45 billion euros in rail investment needs. In 2024, every third train in Germany was delayed. Every third. This is a country that built its global reputation on precision, on punctuality, on engineering excellence. And now a third of its trains can't arrive on time because the tracks are falling apart. The debt break didn't just starve the infrastructure, It blew up the government in November 2024. The ruling coalition collapsed over a fight about the debt break. Chancellor Olaf Scholz wanted to suspend it to fund Ukraine aid. Finance Minister Christian Lindner refused. Lindner was fired. The coalition imploded. Snap elections were called for February 2025. The constitutional rule that was supposed to ensure fiscal stability instead ensured political chaos at the worst possible moment. There is a nationwide shortage of 800,000 homes. The digital infrastructure is embarrassing for a first-world economy. Broadband coverage lags behind most of Western Europe. The country that invented the modern automobile can't get reliable high-speed internet to half its rural communities. The debt break didn't just limit spending, it created a culture of underinvestment so profound that economists started calling it not a debt break but an investment break. The irony is excruciating. Germany was so afraid of becoming a debt crisis country that it became a crumbling infrastructure country instead. It was like going on such a strict diet that your muscles wasted away and you couldn't walk anymore. And the infrastructure wasn't the only thing aging. Because while Germany was refusing to invest in concrete and steel, it was also failing to invest in the one resource no economy can survive without: people. Nail number 6. The demographic time bomb. Germany has 83 million people, but here is the number that should keep every German policymaker awake at night. In the next 10 years, 20 million workers are expected to retire, and only 12.5 million will enter the labor market to replace them. That is a gap of 7.5 million workers. Gone in a decade. 30% of the German workforce is approaching retirement age within the next 15 years. This isn't a slow leak. This is a dam about to break, and it is hitting at the worst possible time, right when the economy needs every engineer, every technician, every skilled tradesperson it can find to retool, rebuild, and compete. Germany used to solve its labor shortages through immigration. Turkish guest workers built the economic miracle. Eastern Europeans filled the gaps after reunification, but immigration has become politically toxic. The rise of the Alternative for Germany Party, the AfD, has made every politician terrified of appearing too open to foreign workers. The very workforce that Germany desperately needs is being kept out by the politics of fear, and the irony is brutal. Germany has simultaneously too few workers for its factories and too much political resistance to bringing more in. The country is projected to face a shortage of 768,000 skilled workers by 2028. That is up from 487,000 projected just a year earlier. The shortage is accelerating. Job vacancies have halved from their 2022 peak to just over 1 million. Not because companies don't need workers, but because many have simply stopped trying to expand in Germany. And here is the knife twist. Germany's labor costs are now the primary driver of its declining competitiveness, not energy labor. Sluggish productivity growth combined with rising wages has pushed unit labor costs higher than France, higher than Spain, the country that pioneered wage restraint in the 2000s. The very strategy that made it competitive has now lost that edge entirely. The Hartz reforms that saved Germany in the early 2000s have run their course, and nothing has replaced them. But it gets worse because even if you had the workers, you'd still have to fight through the bureaucracy. And that brings us to nail number 7, the red tape tax. Since the 1980s, every single German government has pledged to reduce bureaucracy. Every single one has failed. Germany's regulatory environment has become so dense, so complex, so suffocating that it functions as a hidden tax on every business in the country. Want to build a factory plan for 7 to 10 years of permitting? Want to install a wind turbine? 4 to 5 years of environmental reviews. Want to hire a foreign engineer? Navigate an immigration system that was designed in the 20th century for the 20th century. The EU's Green Deal, while well-intentioned, adds an estimated 1.5 billion euros in annual compliance costs to European industry. And Germany, with its dense industrial base, absorbs a disproportionate share of that burden. Here is a stat that should make you laugh if it didn't make you want to cry. Germany still relies on fax machines in many government offices. In 2025, the country that built the Autobahn communicates with its citizens via fax. The digitalization lag is so severe that the IMF's own assessment of Germany specifically flagged it as a structural impediment to growth. Short-time work programs, the Kurzarbeit system that was praised during the financial crisis, have become a double-edged sword. They keep workers on payrolls at reduced hours, which sounds humane, but they also prevent the creative destruction that allows workers and capital to flow to more productive sectors. Companies that should have adapted were propped up. Workers who needed to retrain stayed in declining roles. The economy calcified while the world accelerated. Imagine you own a company you want to grow. You need to hire 20 people, build a new workshop, and connect it to the power grid. In Texas, that takes months. In Germany, it takes years. So you build in Texas. That is not a hypothetical. That is what is actually happening. BASF is investing billions in the United States. Volkswagen manufactures more cars outside Germany than inside it. The message from German industry is clear. We love our country. We just can't afford to work here anymore. Speaking of building things, if you followed the channel, you know we follow the money. And if you hit that subscribe button, you are telling the algorithm this forensic analysis is worth watching. It helps the channel survive in an economy that, unlike Germany's, is actually growing. Now, let's talk about the one thing Germany tried to throw at the problem when everything else was crumbling. Nail number 8. The €500 billion Hail Mary. In March 2025, Germany did something that would have been unthinkable even 3 months earlier. Friedrich Merz, a conservative leader who had campaigned on fiscal discipline, stood up and rewrote the German constitution. He loosened the debt brake. He created a €500 billion infrastructure fund. He exempted defense spending above 1% of GDP from all borrowing limits. Deutsche Bank's research strategist said it best: everything you thought you knew about Germany's economic prospects 3 months ago should be ripped up. Morgan Stanley upgraded growth forecasts. Economists started rewriting their models. The market reaction was instant. German bond yields surged. The fiscal Boy Scout of Europe had just pulled out a credit card. The plan was massive: $500 billion for infrastructure. Transport, hospitals, energy, education, research, digitization, plus unlimited borrowing for defense. The scale rivals what Germany spent on reunification. On paper, it is exactly what the economy needs. A defibrillator applied to a flatlined patient. But here is the problem, and it is the same problem that has plagued Germany for 20 years. You can allocate €500 billion, but you still need people to build things. You still need permits to be approved. You still need the bureaucracy to not strangle every project in its crib. By October 2025, the promise of stimulus had already faded into reality. GDP stagnated again in the third quarter. The money was approved, but it hadn't reached the economy. Ing's chief economist said it plainly. The government remains stuck in a 20th-century growth model without a clear plan to propel the German economy forward. You can pump money into a body, but if the arteries are clogged, the blood doesn't flow. Germany's arteries, its permitting processes, its labor shortages, its bureaucratic culture are almost completely blocked. And there is another catch. A big chunk of that spending isn't going to factories or railways, it is going to tanks and jets. Defense spending is scheduled to hit 3.5% of GDP, that is the NATO target. And while defense spending creates jobs, it doesn't build the kind of infrastructure that makes an economy competitive. Missiles don't improve your broadband. Fighter jets don't fix your trains. The projections tell the story. Germany's debt-to-GDP ratio will rise from 63% to somewhere between 73 and 100% by the mid-2030s, depending on how much spending actually materializes and how fast the economy grows. And there is a fundamental tension with EU fiscal rules that cap debt at 60%. Nail number 9, the Trump tariff hammer. As if everything else weren't enough, Germany walked straight into a global trade war, and it walked into it wearing a bullseye. In 2025, the Trump administration slapped 25% tariffs on vehicles and vehicle parts imported from the European Union. Even after negotiations brought it down to 15%, that is still 6 times the previous rate of 2.5%. For a country that exports 50% of everything it makes and whose single largest manufactured export is cars. This was a body blow. Germany is the most trade-exposed major economy in the G7. Goods exports account for 34% of GDP. Compare that to 23% in France. When tariffs go up globally, Germany gets hit first and hardest. Goldman Sachs specifically downgraded Germany after the US election, citing its extreme vulnerability to trade tensions. And it is not just the direct tariff costs, it is the uncertainty. During Trump's first term, even without many actual tariffs on Europe, the mere threat caused a sharp growth slowdown in 2018 and 2019. Businesses don't invest when they don't know the rules. They don't hire when they can't predict costs. Germany was already hesitant. The tariffs pushed it into paralysis. Volkswagen alone reported that U.S. tariffs were a key factor in its 37% profit decline. The German auto industry, which ships hundreds of thousands of vehicles to America every year, suddenly found each car carrying a 15% penalty. Some companies absorbed the cost. Others raised prices. Either way, the math got worse. And then there is China on the other side of the vice. Germany's trade deficit with China exploded from roughly 20 billion euros per year before 2021 to 65 billion euros in 2024. China went from Germany's best customer to its biggest competitor in less than a decade. The country that used to buy German machines now builds machines that compete with German ones. At half the price, Germany now finds itself squeezed between two giants. China eats its market share from below, building better products cheaper. America squeezes it from above, raising walls against its exports. And Europe, the home market, is too fragmented and too slow growing to compensate. Nail number 10, the innovation gap. The future Germany didn't build. Here is perhaps the most damning failure of all. It is not about what Germany lost. It is about what Germany never created. Germany spends 3.1% of GDP on research and development. That sounds impressive. It is. But look at what it is spending on. Cars, machines, chemicals. The industries of the 20th century. When you look at the industries of the 21st century, artificial intelligence, cloud computing, biotech, semiconductor design, platform economics, Germany is essentially absent. There is no German Google, no German Amazon, no German Nvidia. The country that invented the automobile and modern chemistry has produced almost nothing in the digital economy that matters globally. SAP is the exception, and it was founded in 1972, when Volkswagen tried to build its own software division called Cariad. To compete with Tesla's digital ecosystem, it was a catastrophe. Billions invested, years wasted. The software was buggy, delayed, and ultimately contributed to the very crisis that is now gutting the company. Germany tried to digitize its crown jewel and failed, and it goes deeper than cars. Germany's venture capital market is a fraction of America's startup ecosystem, while growing, cannot compete with the sheer gravitational pull of Silicon Valley, Austin, or even London. The best German software engineers often leave for American companies that pay double and move twice as fast. Germany doesn't just have a brain drain to other countries. It has a brain drain to other sectors and other centuries. The International Energy Agency estimates that global electricity demand from data centers could double between 2022 and 2026. These are the factories of the future, and Germany, with its 3 to 4 times higher electricity prices, is structurally unable to compete for them. AI companies don't build data centers where power costs a fortune. They build them in Texas, in Scandinavia, in the Middle East, not in Germany. The uptake of AI and advanced digital skills in German manufacturing has been stagnant since the 1990s. Let me repeat that. Stagnant since the 1990s. While China was leapfrogging into smart cockpits and digital ecosystems, Germany was perfecting the internal combustion engine, an engine the world is actively phasing out. It is like spending 30 years mastering the art of typewriter repair while the rest of the world switched to computers. So here we are. The forensic evidence is laid out. The autopsy is complete. Let's read the report. The verdict: Germany is not dying, but it is in intensive care, and the diagnosis is not a single disease. It is a cascade of systemic failures that all struck at the same time. Here is the final bill of Germany's lost half-decade. 1. GDP growth since 2019, 0%. 6 years of economic flatline while the rest of the developed world grew. 2. Industrial output, declining for 4 consecutive years, manufacturing employment down 250,000 since 2019. 3. Automotive crisis. Over 50,000 jobs cut in a single year, Volkswagen slashing 35,000 positions. The industry that defined German excellence fighting for survival. 4. Energy costs 3 to 4 times higher than the United States. The single biggest competitive disadvantage in global manufacturing. 5. Corporate exodus. 196,000 businesses gone in 2024. Nearly 24,000 insolvencies projected for 2025. German companies investing billions abroad instead of at home. 6. Infrastructure decay. 10,000 bridges needing repair. Every third train delayed. 800,000 home shortage. 2 decades of near-zero net public investment. 7. Demographic cliff. 20 million retirements in the next decade. Only 12.5 million replacements entering the workforce. A gap that will widen every single year. But let's be clear about what actually caused this. It wasn't one villain, it was a system of choices. Germany chose cheap Russian gas over energy independence. It chose nuclear elimination over energy pragmatism. It chose fiscal austerity over infrastructure investment. It chose to perfect the past over inventing the future. It chose bureaucratic caution over entrepreneurial speed. And it chose to believe that the export model that worked for 50 years would work forever. None of these choices was insane in isolation. Some of them were even admirable. The debt break came from a genuine fear of fiscal irresponsibility. The nuclear phase-out came from a genuine concern about safety. The labor protections came from a genuine care for workers. But stacked together, over decades, they formed a straitjacket that left the economy unable to move when the world shifted beneath its feet. The German Council of Economic Experts now expects potential output growth of just 0.4% per year. To return to the growth path of the last 3 decades, Germany would need 2.5% annual growth for 6 straight years. Nobody believes that is coming. The IMF has flagged that Germany's current crisis has already exceeded the depth of all 3 previous post-reunification downturns. In some cases, considerably, and here is the part that doesn't show up in any GDP number. The psychological cost to Germany's self-image, the Wirtschaftswunder nation, the country that made things better than anyone, the engineering culture that was a source of national pride, that identity is cracking. Consumer confidence is in the basement. Business sentiment surveys from the IFO Institute have been negative for months. The savings rate is elevated because people are scared to spend. When the most industrious people in Europe stop believing in their own economy, you've lost something no stimulus package can buy back. Germany has the tools to come back. 500 billion in stimulus. A still world-class engineering culture, deep capital reserves, a population that has rebuilt from literal ashes before, twice. But the rebuild requires something Germany hasn't done in decades. Speed, boldness, a willingness to break old rules. The 500 billion euros is a start. But money without reform is just expensive wallpaper. Germany needs to cut permitting times from years to months. It needs to attract and retain global talent instead of burying immigration applications in bureaucratic quicksand. It needs to accept that the world has moved on from the combustion engine and build the digital infrastructure for what comes next. And it needs to do all of this while its best workers are retiring and its best companies are leaving. History teaches us that Germany can do this. The Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle after World War II. The Hartz reforms that rescued it from the sick man label in the early 2000s reunification, which merged 2 economies in a decade. Germans know how to rebuild. The question is whether the political system can move fast enough before the patient on the table loses too much blood. The economy hasn't nailed Germany, not yet, but it has put Germany on notice. And the next 2 years will determine whether the world's 3rd largest economy rises from the operating table or becomes a cautionary tale about what happens when a great nation mistakes the past for the future. Because here's the thing nobody wants to say out loud. Germany's problem isn't that it made bad products. Its products are still extraordinary. Germany's problem is that it built the perfect 20th century economy and then the 21st century arrived and it arrived with cheap Chinese EVs, American tech dominance, weaponized energy markets, and a demographic cliff, all at once, all at the same time. If you found this industrial autopsy worth your time, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm this matters, and subscribe if you want to be here for the next chapter. Because the question of whether Germany can reinvent itself for the 21st century is not just a German question. It is a European question. It is a global question. When the engine of Europe stalls, every economy on the continent feels the shudder. I'll see you in the comments. And remember, economics isn't just about GDP. It is about whether the country your grandparents built still has a future for your grandchildren.